Cyberpunk is a genre that is frequently and thoroughly misunderstood. People often assume that slapping a cybernetic limb onto a character and throwing in some neon lights is all it takes to create a cyberpunk story. So we have plenty of books, movies, and video games which are perceived as cyberpunk by the public, when in reality there's something else entirely. Cyberpunk emerged in the late 70s as a literary movement, reaching its maturity in 1984 with the release of William Gibson's Neuromancer. This groundbreaking novel introduced readers to a world where cyberspace was a playground for hackers. Artificial intelligence had its own agenda, and the future looked more like a bad trip than a utopia. Gibson had been writing cyberpunk short stories before Neuromancer, laying down the genre's tropes, but they didn't have such a cultural impact as his genre-defining best-selling novel. The term cyberpunk itself is a mashup of cyber, referring to the futuristic tech, and punk, representing the anti-establishment attitude. High-tech and low-life. In a cyberpunk world, mega-corporations run the show. Hackers and mercenaries do the dirty work, and the rest of us just try to survive the chaos. Cyberpunk isn't about exploring the stars. It's about exploring the underbelly of society. Although Bruce Sterling's Schismatrix is a bit about exploring the stars as well, but first of all, that's the exception. And second, most works released by the founding fathers of cyberpunk in the 80s can be and should be classified as such. Because once again, originally it was a literary movement. While you can find proto-cyberpunk elements in the earlier works of writers like Philip K. Dick, that doesn't automatically make them proper cyberpunk. Even if Blade Runner somehow managed to become an archetypal cyberpunk movie and a key influence on the whole visual aesthetic of the genre that was at its infancy at the time. William Gibson actually was writing Neuromancer when Ridley Scott's film was released, and he was shocked how close the visuals matched the picture he had in his head. But you should be careful with labeling Philip K. Dick's works as cyberpunk, just like you should completely ignore people who claim that Metropolis from 1927 was the first cyberpunk film ever. Even Akira, which is perceived by many as one of the best cyberpunk movies and shares the top spot with Ghost in the Shell as the quintessential cyberpunk anime, well, it is not really cyberpunk. Ghost in the Shell is cyberpunk. Akira is not. The important thing about the genre is that it essentially explores the clash between the promise of technology and the grim reality of how it's actually used. A world where the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and everyone else just tries to survive in the shadow of towering skyscrapers. It's the dark side of the digital revolution, where the tech doesn't save the day, it enslaves it. Naturally, cyberpunk, at least the best works in the genre, is not really about some distant future. It is mostly about what's just around the corner or what's happening right now. Much like Orwell's 1984 wasn't really about the year 1984, but mostly about 1948, the year it was written. The same can be said about any book or a film, but it is particularly evident in the case of cyberpunk, and especially the classic works of the 80s, which were a product of Cold War paranoia and the arrival of computer networks destined to change the world forever. The key figures were science fiction writers who were more interested in proper futurology than in Star Wars, and sometimes managed to predict certain developments, and invent some vocabulary to describe them along the way. The most popular examples are cyberspace, coined by William Gibson, and metaverse by Neil Stephenson. Classic cyberpunk of the 80s quickly evolved into something that can be called post-cyberpunk, where Gibson and Sterling were, and still are, the most prominent figures, joined by the likes of the above-mentioned Neil Stephenson, who basically produced one of the milestone works of the genre, Snow Crash, published in 1992. It can be seen as some sort of a dividing line, a work which tells a traditional cyberpunk story, but adds quite a lot of sense of humor in all this dystopia. But even though the genre, along with the founding fathers, drifted into post-cyberpunk territories, the classic version of cyberpunk is still in demand, although now it feels like a retro future in many ways. But its main themes continue to resonate, for quite obvious reasons.